I was standing at my own gender reveal party, pink smoke filling the room, my husband looking at me like I was the only person he had ever loved. And I took the microphone and told 28 people I had no idea if the baby was his. Was there really no way to know? Or did I just stop counting the nights I could not explain? My name is Cressida Voss. I am 31 years old, and I teach Pilates at a studio I co-own in Edgewood. And if you asked anyone who knew me to describe me in a single word before that afternoon, every single one of them would have said the same thing. Controlled. That was not an accident. I maintained it the way you maintain a particular posture, deliberately, with the constant low awareness of being watched, and with the absolute conviction that as long as the surface held, nothing underneath it counted. Aldrich, my husband, was 34, a civil engineer, unhurried and quietly attentive in the way of someone who notices more than he says. The apartment was warm and orderly. Everything looked correct. What did not look correct, to anyone who was not inside my head, was the second schedule I had been running since the previous October. I told Aldrich that Friday evenings were time with my best friend Bex, dinner, a walk, the ordinary social life of two women who had known each other for 8 years. The actual evenings were Club Meridian on Holt Street, UV stamp at the door, bass in the sternum before it was sound, and a specific quality of being wanted that the marriage had stopped supplying in ways I could not fully articulate even to myself, and had mostly stopped trying to. I am not going to dress this as a cry for help. It was a choice made weekly for 7 months. When Aldrich found a Club Meridian receipt in my coat pocket and placed it on the counter between us, not dramatically, the way he placed all evidence, which was like a man setting down a field measurement that does not yet belong to a complete picture, and asked whether a birthday dinner at Bex's apartment typically moved to a club after midnight, I told him that a man who searched his wife's pockets was conducting surveillance in his own home. I watched the receipt go into the kitchen recycling. I went to the bedroom. He sat in his armchair for a long time after, and I told myself that silence was concession. I was wrong about that. I was wrong about most of the silences. The test was positive on a Wednesday morning, and I stood at the sink and performed the calculation I had been refusing to perform for 8 weeks. I knew the calendar. I also knew that in the past 8 weeks there had been at least 3 evenings at Club Meridian I could not account for with any precision. I could not name the men. I could not be certain which night had produced the result on the porcelain edge of the sink. In the supply closet at the studio, I sat on a foam roller box and decided the baby was Aldrich's. Not because I had evidence, because I needed it to be true, and I had spent 7 months proving to myself that what I needed to be true could function as truth if I held it firmly enough. At the rooftop restaurant, he talked about names before the dessert arrived: the spare room, a bassinet, schools. He reached across the table and covered my hand with his. I sat across from a man who was entirely happy, entirely certain, and entirely wrong, and told myself the decision I had made in the supply closet would hold. It had the feeling, even then, of a thing I was saying to myself because the alternative was not bearable. 10 days later, he sat in his armchair, always the armchair for real conversations, and turned the joint account screen toward me. 14 Club Meridian charges across January through March. On 4 of those dates, I had described the evening to him specifically. He asked whether a headache that kept a person home typically resolved at a nightclub on Holt Street at 12:48 a.m. I told him monitoring joint spending was surveillance. I pivoted to the baby. He closed the app and said he would like to understand, when I had a chance, and marked it the way he marked unfinished items, not with pressure, with patience. A week before the reveal, he offered to postpone by 1 month if it gave me space to tell him the truth first. I told him it was the most controlling suggestion he had made in 3 years of marriage. I used the words his child without noticing. He noticed. The evening before the party, the home tablet showed a cloud sync notification for 1 second. Upload complete, 2 items. I told myself it was a work backup, and went to check the venue confirmation. The gender reveal was a Saturday in early April. I arrived at Edgewood Events Hall at 11:15 for setup, and the champagne I poured for the decorating volunteers also gave me a glass before the first guest arrived. By 2 in the afternoon, I had consumed 3 Proseccos and was managing my awareness of this by not assigning it a number. The room was everything I had planned. Pale pink and ivory balloon arch, white runner tables, small framed sonogram prints at each place setting, and at the front a pale cardboard box containing the strawberry-scented smoke canister our midwife had sealed. In the card she had written that it was a girl. Aldrich did not yet know the colour. The room filled with the particular warmth of a celebration where everyone already loves the people at the centre of it, and I watched it happen from slightly inside myself. Helena found me near the balloon arch and pressed both hands around mine and said she had been hoping for a granddaughter since Cora was born. She put her palm briefly against my bump with the careful reverence of a woman who has been waiting for this moment for years, and I watched her face while she did it and felt the specific weight of what she did not know. Across the room, Cora stood with a glass of water and watched me over Helena's shoulder. Her expression was not hostile and not warm. It was the expression of an obstetrics nurse at a family party, clinically attentive, professionally composed, waiting. At 2:45, Aldrich found me near the rear fire door and asked if we could step outside. On the concrete service terrace, cold, flat light, the driveway below, he said he had been sitting with the phrase I used the week before, his child, and needed to ask me privately whether the baby they were about to celebrate was one he could be fully certain about. He said there was no version of this conversation that required me to feel punished. He said he would rather know in this cold doorway than in the room full of people who mattered to both of them. I told him that his need to introduce uncertainty into the most important afternoon of my year was the clearest answer yet about his capacity for support. I walked back through the fire door. He stood on the terrace for 40 seconds. Then he followed. He pulled the cord at 3:15. Pink smoke spread toward the white ceiling in a slow, artificial strawberry cloud. The room erupted. Helena covered her mouth with both hands. Cora smiled for the first time all afternoon. Aldrich turned to look at me, complete, undefended, the face of a man who has decided to be entirely in the room he is standing in. And I looked back at him, and the pink smoke moved between us, and I knew, with a certainty I had not allowed myself in 10 weeks, that I did not know whose child we were celebrating. The speech began correctly. The guests, the journey, a daughter, the names we had been considering. Then I continued past the end of what I had prepared. I said I wanted to be honest because a celebration deserved honesty. The room laughed the comfortable laugh that follows mild self-deprecation. I said I had not been perfect over the past year. The laugh narrowed. I said there were things Aldrich did not know about. The laugh stopped. Not a slow fade. It stopped. I said I was not completely certain about the timing of the pregnancy. I heard my own voice from a place slightly above and behind my body. I said I had been with more than one person in the past several months and genuinely did not know who the father was. The room held the confession the way a room holds a structural failure, still standing, everything in place, but something fundamental and irreparable had given way inside it. The strawberry smell drifted across the crowd. Juno had not put her phone down. Helena had set her glass on the nearest table. Bex had not moved from the balloon arch, her expression the blankness of someone whose body has decided to wait until somewhere private before it reacts. Aldrich was 4 meters from the platform and completely still, his face resolved into the absence of all the expressions he had worn that afternoon. The look of a man who has just confirmed the worst version of the picture he was hoping was wrong. I stepped away from the microphone and said, "Pregnancy did things to your emotions in public." 20 minutes later, he came to the fire door and asked whether I was uncertain because of one event, or because there were multiple people across multiple evenings I genuinely could not account for. He said the answer changed what happened next for their daughter. He asked for one name, not all of them, just one, because a name was where an honest conversation could begin. I said he was asking me to perform a second confession in a service driveway on the same afternoon I had already been more honest than I had ever been. He looked at me for a long time. He said he would take me home when I was ready. At 4:17, Bex's phone filled with messages asking whether the video was real. She opened Juno's social story. 31 seconds of clear audio. My voice naming the uncertainty in front of the pink smoke while 28 people stood very still. Sunday morning, the apartment had the quality of a room after a medical procedure. Every surface present, every function performing, but the air holding the shape of something that had been removed. Aldrich made 2 coffees at the counter without asking and left mine on my side without saying anything. He said he was going for a walk and would be back in an hour. While he was gone, I turned my phone face down without reading the messages. I called Bex and got voicemail. I called my mother, who answered in a worried voice and asked what I meant at the party, exactly. I told her it was the Prosecco and the emotion of the day. She said she saw, and the distance in her voice was something I was not ready for. Not anger, just the withdrawal of certainty. A mother who has been the last person to know something and is quietly recalculating everything she thought she understood. 3 days later, Helena called a family dinner rather than cancelling it, which was its own communication. The Voss dining room, beef broth from the kitchen, oiled oak, the row of Niels's surveying certificates on the hall wall. 6 of us. The dinner moved through its ordinary shape for an hour. Aldrich's infrastructure project, a ward protocol Cora was implementing. Helena moving between the kitchen and the table with the focused warmth of a woman who is managing an extremely difficult evening through the discipline of hospitality. I participated. I was polite. I managed the room. Then Niels set down his fork. He was 63 years old, a retired surveyor, a man who had spent his career taking precise measurements of land that other people would build on. And he looked at me across the polished oak table with the particular directness of someone who has decided that the most useful thing they can do in a given moment is say the exact true thing. He said that a man who trusted his wife with a house and a child and a life had earned the right to one honest sentence. He said it without heat and without judgment, the way a surveyor might note that a boundary is in the wrong place. And then he picked up his fork and continued eating. The table absorbed it. Helena refilled the water glasses with great attention to the task. Cora looked at Aldrich. Aldrich looked at his plate. 30 seconds passed with no one speaking, and those 30 seconds had more weight than anything that had been said in the room at full volume. I sat inside them and understood that this family had made a decision about me, not out of cruelty, but out of the specific grief of people who had been looking forward to something that was now a different shape than they thought it was. At the door, Helena hugged Aldrich for 3 seconds longer than their usual goodbye. She hugged me with the complete physical mechanics of an embrace and none of its warmth, which communicated more precisely than anything she could have said. Cora, putting on her coat in the hallway, told me in a low and neutral voice that she was available if I ever wanted to understand what the conception window mathematics looked like from a clinical perspective. She said it the way an obstetrics nurse says difficult things, factually, without embellishment, as though the information were more important than the conversation around it. I went to Bex's apartment the next day. Kitchen table, ceramic pendant light, the contact sheet on the corkboard, and I was halfway through asking her to take down any reshares of Juno's clip and to tell anyone who asked that I had not been in a reliable state when I saw what was on the corkboard. 2 prints from a crowd at a venue I recognised as Club Meridian's mezzanine level, from a freelance night Bex had been booked to photograph 4 months ago. I had been in that room that night. I had never been certain she knew. She was looking at the prints too. Then she looked at me. She said she could not describe what was on the video as misspeaking, because the words on the video were the words I said. She said she had covered for me for 7 months because I asked her to and because she told herself the details were not her business, and she was not going to add another layer to that arrangement. She said it without softness and without malice, the specific tone of someone who has been rotating a decision for 2 days and has finally set it down. She said she hoped Aldrich and I could work through it. What Bex did not tell me, what I would not learn until I read the evidence appendix in the hospital waiting room 3 weeks later, was that Aldrich had sat at this same kitchen table 4 days earlier. He had come alone without announcement on a Tuesday evening, and Bex had let him in because she had been waiting for someone to ask her the right question, and Aldrich had asked it. He wanted to know specifically which Friday and Saturday evenings Bex had not been with me when she said she had. He placed the printed bank statement on the kitchen table between them and asked her to tell him the dates she could account for and the ones she could not. He did not ask her to say anything negative about me. He asked only for accuracy. Bex had looked at the contact sheet on her corkboard and at the Club Meridian mezzanine prints and at the bank statement on the table, and she had told him the truth. All of it. Every date. I left her apartment and opened Instagram on the pavement outside and found that Juno's clip had been saved and reposted by 4 accounts I did not follow. That evening I implemented the offer I had been constructing for 2 days to sound like genuine accountability. I sat across from Aldrich at the kitchen table and told him I wanted to be honest. There had been one other person, once, during a low period earlier in the year, and I regretted it deeply. And I genuinely believed the baby was his, given the timing of that single encounter. I named the month. I said the party had been a panic-distorted version of the truth, and the Prosecco had turned one difficult fact into something much larger than it was. I said I was willing to stop working with overlapping freelance clients, to share my location going forward, to attend couples counselling at a practice I had already identified. Then I named the condition. I needed Aldrich to ask Cora to delete the saved screenshot from the reveal and to contact the account that had reposted Juno's clip and request its removal because the video in circulation was going to harm our daughter before she was even born. Aldrich listened to every word. Then he asked about the February 12th bank entry, not the collection of charges, but that specific Friday, and the Thursday in March, and the Saturday in late January, and he asked how one encounter in 1 month produced charges at Club Meridian across 3 separate evenings in 3 different months. He said he had heard the compromise and was not dismissing it, but the condition I had attached, removing the evidence, was itself a piece of information he needed to evaluate because his family's knowledge could not survive a condition it did not know it had accepted. I said he was using a counselling offer as leverage for an inquest, and that the condition was about our daughter's privacy and not about evidence, and I was asking him as a father to consider that. He said he would think about it, and his voice had the quality of something that had already thought, and had thought its way somewhere I was not included in. 2 days later, I came home to find him at the desk alcove, transferring papers into his work bag in the methodical, unhurried way of someone who has been planning this particular reorganization for some time. His passport, his vehicle registration, the lease, the brown accordion folder. He said it was for a work audit. On the hook by the front door, the leather lanyard was still there. The brass key that had lived on it for 3 years was not. I told myself it was a mood. I went to bed before him. That evening, Aldrich's phone lit up on the kitchen counter with a calendar notification. Crestfield Medical Centre, 2:15 p.m., Thursday. He dismissed it without looking at me. I stood in the kitchen and looked at the blank screen where it had been, and the fish tank sound from the gender reveal room moved through my memory without explanation, and I did not know why. Aldrich came back from the Crestfield appointment on a Friday at 5:40, and he was warm and domestic and asked about my afternoon and set the dinner table with the ease of someone who has been given a number they were already expecting and the number has simply confirmed what they were already prepared to do. He did not mention the fake compromise. He did not mention the bank conversation. He had moved into a different register entirely. Not distant, but self-contained, and the self-containment was thorough in the way of something that had been thought through rather than felt through. That evening he opened a new labelled section in the brown accordion folder. I passed the alcove on the way to the bathroom and saw the tab. A date and 2 initials, nothing more. And he closed the folder before I could speak. On a Tuesday lunchtime, he walked into the Highfield Bank branch on the High Street and requested a printed 6-month statement for the joint account. The teller produced it in 3 minutes. He stood at the counter and circled in pen 14 entries. 12 Club Meridian charges across Friday and Saturday evenings from January through late March, and 2 rideshare pickups from a street 1 block from the club, at times between 1 and 3 in the morning, on dates that corresponded precisely to the evenings I had told him were dinner parties, studio events, and nights at home with a headache. The ink on the Club Meridian entries was slightly smudged from the humidity of the branch counter. He folded the statement twice, placed it in the accordion folder, and returned to work. On Wednesday morning, I sat at Diane's kitchen table with a pot of tea between us and delivered the version I had spent 10 days constructing to sound like genuine distress. I spoke softly and said I had been carrying an enormous amount alone, that the gender reveal confession was the collapse of a woman who had been holding too much without support, that Aldrich's withdrawal during the pregnancy had left me without anywhere to put the weight of it. I said I loved the baby and I loved the idea of what the marriage was supposed to be. I said I was looking for my mother's presence, not her judgment. Diane held my hand across the table. Then she asked, plainly and with the expression of someone who had been working up to it for a week, whether what I said at the party, about not knowing who the father was true or not. I said it was a moment of overwhelm and imprecision. She nodded slowly and squeezed my hand, but the squeeze had the feeling of a hand holding something it was not certain it should be holding. She called Cora that evening. She did not tell me she was going to. 4 days before Aldrich's final conversation with me on a Thursday afternoon, I posted an Instagram reel to my public profile. Soft morning light through the studio windows, my hand resting on my small, visible bump, a caption about some seasons asking more from you than you expected, about growing a daughter through a difficult chapter and still choosing to show up. I tagged the studio account and 3 wellness brands I had partnerships with. The post was calibrated precisely. It communicated suffering without naming a cause, positioned me as a woman navigating difficulty with grace, and arrived in front of 34,000 followers who knew only the presentation. 308 responses in 2 hours. Aldrich saw the post at 12:14 p.m. He was sitting at the desk alcove with the accordion folder open, and he opened his phone and read the caption. And then he read it again. And then he set his phone face down on the desk and opened his notes application and added 1 line below the others. The post had gone live while I was in a morning session. He had access to the shared calendar, which listed the scan appointment he had not yet attended. The Instagram caption, "Brave Mother Navigating Difficulty," was the exact inverse, in language and posture, of the 31-second clip that 3 witnesses had now submitted to him in writing. He did not comment on the post. He did not like it. He closed the notes application and returned to the accordion folder. Cora received a wellness notification through a mutual follower at 12:41. She took a screenshot and sent it to Aldrich with a single line noting the timestamp relative to the bank records. 3 days after the post, Aldrich sat with me in the living room at 9:15 in the evening. He sat in the armchair, always the armchair, and told me he was going to offer one final honest conversation. Not about the party or the receipts, but about the fundamental question, was the baby his? He said he had been asking this in different forms for 6 weeks and had not received an answer he could trust. He told me he had the bank statement with the 14 entries, the Juno clip with clear audio and a timestamp, and a signed medical declaration from Cora about the clinically standard conception window for the submitted gestational age. He asked whether, in that context, the answer from the fake compromise, one encounter, 1 month, she believed the baby was his, was still the answer I was giving, because 14 evenings of Club Meridian charges suggested a different frequency, and frequency changed the mathematics entirely. I told him that a man who spent 6 weeks assembling bank records and witness declarations against his pregnant wife was not asking a question in good faith, but closing a case he had already decided on, and I refused to perform a confession for a verdict already reached. I said the Instagram post was a wellness post for my professional audience, not a statement to him. I said the conversation was finished. He did not argue with the shutdown. He stood. He said he had tried to have this conversation honestly across many attempts, and that he was now going to handle the situation properly. He said it without raising his voice, without listing the evidence, without any of the anger the situation objectively deserved. He picked up his work bag from the alcove and took it to the bedroom. I heard the desk drawer, the one that had never been locked, click shut. In the morning, a new entry had appeared in the shared calendar in his column. Edgewood Medical, 9 a.m., Thursday. The anatomy scan was already in my column for the same date and time. I told myself he was coming to the appointment. Thursday morning at 6, his phone alarm sounded from the desk, labelled 9 a.m., bring forms. He silenced it without showing me the screen, told me he would meet me at the hospital, and left 40 minutes before I did. Edgewood Community Hospital, 2nd floor, North Wing. I arrived at the obstetrics registration desk at 9:07 and received a wristband printed with my name and the appointment reference number, and took a seat in the second row from the reception window. Mint green padded chairs. A fish tank on the counter making its small continuous sound. A wall display of prenatal milestone photographs. 3 other women already seated, each in the private internal world of a scan appointment, not looking at each other the way people in waiting rooms do not look at each other. The clock above the reception window read 9:08. A man in a navy jacket came through the wing's double doors. He spoke briefly to the receptionist. She looked at me and nodded once. He crossed the waiting room directly to where I was sitting and confirmed my full legal name, and I said yes from the habit of every medical check-in I had ever attended. And he handed me a sealed envelope and a stapled document set, and stated clearly and without apology that he was serving me with a formal divorce petition filed in the county family court, accompanied by a court-ordered prenatal paternity DNA testing notice requiring my attendance at a certified genetic testing clinic within 14 days. Non-invasive prenatal testing drawn from a blood sample, results to be held by the court pending the first hearing. The hearing date was on the 2nd page. The testing date was on the 3rd. He left. The fish tank continued its small sound. The 3 other women in the waiting room looked at their phones, at the floor, at the prenatal milestone photographs on the wall, with the careful attention of people who have heard something they are pretending they did not hear. I opened the document at the 4th page and read the evidence schedule with the scan appointment wristband still around my wrist. The Juno Feld video, 31 seconds, submitted by 3 named witnesses with a full audio transcript attached. 14 Club Meridian bank entries, itemized by date and amount, sourced from the joint account statement requested at the Highfield Bank branch. 2 rideshare records from the street 1 block from the club. A signed medical declaration from Cora Voss, RN, obstetrics, attaching the clinically standard conception window for the submitted gestational age, and noting that the window encompassed every date on the bank record. A written statement from Bex Renner describing 7 months of false alibi provision, specific dates named, signed 4 days prior. The Instagram reel, publicly archived, time-stamped, captioned, submitted as a character exhibit given its publication 3 days after Aldrich named the dates he was investigating. I went to the reception desk, and said in a controlled voice that there had been a mistake and that the documents I had received were part of a dispute that should not have reached a hospital waiting room. The receptionist confirmed that service in a clinical environment was within legal parameters and offered me a glass of water. I went to the corridor outside the scan room and called Aldrich. 4 rings. Voicemail. I called again. Voicemail again. I sent a message saying there had been a misunderstanding and asked him to call me. The read receipt appeared within 3 minutes. Standing in that corridor, I understood what I had been refusing to understand for 10 weeks. I had believed that controlling the narrative meant controlling the outcome. I had believed that the managed story, the fake compromise, the Instagram reel were forms of protection. What the evidence appendix showed was that each of those moves had produced a record. The bank charges because I used the joint card without counting the pattern. The rideshare because the app held location data I had not thought to clear. The gender reveal video because I confessed in front of a room full of phones. The Instagram reel because I posted publicly during an active investigation with a timestamp that sat 3 days after Aldrich named the dates he was collecting. Bex's statement existed because I asked her to lie for 7 months, and she sat at her own kitchen table and chose, finally, not to. Cora's declaration existed because I had a sister-in-law who was an obstetrics nurse and who had been standing in the room when the pink smoke rose and I put a microphone in my own hand. What I had believed was control had been, the entire time, the exact shape of what I was protecting, made visible, made legible, made usable. What I had believed were Aldrich's surrenders were the silences of a man measuring until the number was complete. His reply arrived at 11:02. He said the paternity test would provide clarity for their daughter's medical records and parental rights, and that all further communication should go through his solicitor's contact details on the cover letter. He said he hoped she and the baby were well. That was all. Closure snapshot. The paternity test results arrived at the solicitor's office in the 3rd week. Aldrich Voss was excluded as the contributing party. A second test to identify the contributor was ordered. I could not name anyone specifically. The joint account protection order froze the shared card 2 days later, and my card declined at the pharmacy counter on a Tuesday morning in front of a queue of 4 people. Simone at the studio changed her tone after a mutual contact, forwarded the gender reveal clip, and 2 brand partnerships went quiet without any explanation offered. Bex sent one message, brief, kind, and complete, saying she hoped I found a way through it. Diane called every day for the first 2 weeks, then every 3rd day, then once a week, the rhythm of someone trying to locate the right distance from something they cannot make sense of. The baby girl arrived in late August, healthy and entirely herself, and the custody schedule Aldrich's solicitor had drafted was already filed and waiting for her birthday. On a Wednesday evening, I stood in the apartment alone, in the ordinary late light, and understood that the room I had believed I was managing had been keeping its own record from the beginning, not of what I said, but of every move I made to control what was said. And that record did not care about my version, and had not, and would not, and neither now did anyone in it.